Well, welcome to another episode of Specimen series. It's a little bit different on this episode. I'm going to try and catch some carp, but Specimen series style. So I've been invited over to Alderfen Lake by my good friend Mark Gregory, because it's the perfect little stalking water. And the tactic I'm going to use on this trip is to try and find a few carp under the rod tip in the edge using a little float lift method style. So it's a really exciting way to catch carp, and it's a method that played quite a big part in my fishing when I was slightly younger, and it'll be a bit of a trip down memory lane. So this lake suits this style of fishing perfectly. There's lots of little back bays, reedy little corners, lily pads, so hopefully we can find a few fish. And I've already had a walk round. I've dropped a little bit of bait in, a mixture of pellets and sweet corn, and I've just pre-baited a few little spots in the edge, and now it's a case of just setting the rod up, creeping round the lake and looking for signs of fish feeding on those spots to try and grab a quick bite. Well, I'm going to try and keep fairly quiet, because this very first spot that I put the first handful of pellets and corn in, I can see the reeds are shaking already and there's a few pinprick bubbles. So rather than plumb the depth, I've overweighted this float, and I'm just going to drop it in the margins just to get my depth. I don't mind if it's a little bit over depth, because I can always tighten up and stand the float up. I'll try and get it fairly close. I'm quite keen to get it dropped in there, because there could be a quick bite here. Perfect, right. And I've got a choice of two baits. I've got some sweet corn and some krill paste. I think I'm going to start with a nice blob of paste. I don't know what carp can resist that. Perfect. And now we wait. There's bubbles exactly where I've just dropped that float. You get two types of bite with this style of fishing. The float will either disappear like it does when you're normally float fishing, or sometimes when they pick the bait off the bottom, they'll lift up that weight off the bottom and the float will lay flat, and they're my favourite types of bite. But I'll definitely know when one grabs hold of that. Oh, that face. You sometimes get a few false bites where they bump into the line and just pull the float, almost like a line bite. But if the float disappears, you've got to have a strike at it. This paste does smell incredibly good. I might have to try some of that for chub fishing during the winter. Make sure the clutch is set in case I do catch one. Ignore all the, and there we go. A nice lift bite that was, brilliant. Well, that didn't take long at all. A nice common by the looks of it. It is so nice playing these carp on a 1 3/4 specialist rod and a small float. If you take your time and just play them steady, I've got them away from those reeds, so I'm on about a 10-pound line here, which on this particular lake is fine. Well, I was a little bit anxious because it is quite cool today. We are in April, and I was worried it was going to be a bit cold for finding them in the edge, but hopefully this will be the first of a few. He's just about ready. And there we go. Well, there's an example of opportunist fishing at its best. Pre-baiting those spots, seeing some signs of feeding fish. I saw those pinprick bubbles, the reed stems were knocking, and well, I missed that first bite, and then second drop in, the float stands up, and we've got a nice carp in the net. And sometimes there's a time and a place for being subtle, being quiet, and just getting a quick bite. So it's a lovely looking common. I'm going to take it up on the unhooking mat. I'm going to lose my kneeling pad because the mat's now going to get wet, but let's have a look at it and see what sort of fish we've got. looks good. Well, unlike when you catch them on your Ronnie rigs and your bolt rigs, where you nearly always hook them in the bottom lip, when you're float fishing, because they pick the bait up and you strike above them, you quite often hook them in the top lip like that. So, size 8 hook, it's got a little micro barb on it, but it comes out nice and easy. What an incredibly good conditioned carp. Well, I'm mega pleased with that. That was great fun on that slightly lighter setup, but everything's well balanced, so you can get quite large carp in on this method. In fact, I've had carp over 30 pounds doing exactly this. But I'm really pleased with that. I've seen the reeds knocking again already, and we've got some more spots that I've dropped some bait in. So I'm going to slip this fella back and see if we can catch some more. Before I go and check out those other spots, that's definitely worth another cast here. But the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put another handful of bait in and just watch it for a little while. If the fish are there, I'm confident then bubbles will start again and those reeds will start knocking. So I'm going to give it 15-20 minutes to see if I can get another bite here. Otherwise, we can carry on exploring the lake and try and find some more. When the fish are feeding on these little pre-baited spots, the bite normally comes quite quickly, or you see signs that the carp are there, such as those reeds knocking or bubbles, and it's gone a little bit quiet. I can see there's some fish in the back of the reeds, but I think the best thing I can do is put another handful of bait in, leave it to rest for a little while whilst I go and explore a few of the other spots I've baited. So I'm going to have the float in, put a little bit more pellet out, and we'll perhaps come back here a little bit later on for round 2. I'm going to drop this in a couple of times. I might have to have a couple of gentle plops in there just to see if it's any deeper. I think it is a little bit deeper along this margin. As you see, the weight of the paste and that bit of putty I've got at the bottom, if I'm not deep enough, the whole float disappears. So it's exactly the same as when you plumb the depth when you're normally float fishing, but you're using the weight of the bait and the putty as you plumb it. It shouldn't be far off now, but the beauty of this method, you can really gently lay it in without scaring any fish. Probably want to go a tiny bit deep, that's nearly there. And this should be about perfect now. I don't know if the bite will be quite as instant as the last spot, but it's definitely worth 20 minutes. Dropping in here, I have seen the reeds knocking a little bit earlier, so I'm going to lay the rod down and just patiently wait for a little while. I gave it about 15-20 minutes in that second spot, but unfortunately I didn't see any signs of carp. I think they might have moved on. So I went and put a little bit more bait in a few lightly looking areas, and then I checked a few of the spots that I'd already baited as well. But maybe because the weather was a bit cooler than normal, the fish didn't seem to be spread out as they usually would. So I made my way back to that original corner, and after resting it for a little while, the carp were back. I could see the reeds knocking and a few pinprick bubbles were coming up. I decided it would be a little bit easier if I put the rod rest in this time, so I didn't have to hold the rod, and give it round 2 and see if we catch another one out of that corner. As I'm a little bit over depth, if I'm clever, I can just tighten up to it, careful, and stand the float up. Go on, go on, go on. Yes! Got a little bit of, this is where you've got to trust all your knots and your bits and pieces. Come on, buddy. Here we go. Drag that in. Oh, that's lucky. You just gently tighten up, you can cock the float a bit better. That's lovely, look at those bubbles. There we go. Oh. Good hell. Oh man. Well, it's been a really exciting afternoon. I've had so many close shaves since that first carp. I've suffered a couple of hook pulls, which is a little bit unlucky, but most of the carp I've seen have been in this corner. They definitely like these reeds, although I did bait quite a few spots around the lake. Every time I walk around, I always get drawn back to this corner. But I'm fast running out of time, but I plan on coming back in the morning. We've got some horrible weather coming tomorrow afternoon, but there might be a few hours first thing in the morning when I can come back and try and catch myself another carp on the float. Well, good morning, it's time for round two. I think this is going to be the calm before the storm. Looking at the weather forecast on my phone, there's some really rough weather coming in. About 12 o'clock today, we're going to get 45-mile-an-hour winds and heavy rain. So I've got 3 or 4 hours this morning to try and get another bite or two. So similar to yesterday, I've gone round, I've got this bucket of bait here, some 4mm krill pellets with a bit of sweet corn mixed in with it, and I've baited 3 or 4 spots in the edge. I've baited those flowers that you can see on the reed line over there. I use those flowers as markers, so if I creep round there, I know exactly where the bait is. And again, where I caught that fish yesterday, by those reeds, I've put a few handfuls of bait in there. So I think the key to success this morning is to be a little bit more patient. Unless I see fish feeding on those spots, the bubbles coming up, the reed shaking, I'm going to resist putting the float in until there's definitely a fish on the spot. I think maybe yesterday I was a bit too keen, maybe it's the pressure of the camera, but I just kept dropping that float in, hoping that they'd turn up. And I think being a little bit more subtle and just waiting for a definite sign of a fish, when you drop the float in place, you'll get a bite almost instantly. So I'm going to sit back, wait for some bubbles, wait for some signs of fish, and hopefully get a fish or two before that horrible weather turns up. Well, whilst I'm waiting to see if any carp turn up on them little margin spots, I'm going to take 5 minutes to talk you through the tackle and the setup that I'm using. So first of all, the rod itself. It's an Advanta twin tip barbel rod, but with those 2 top sections, one of those top sections is a straight Avon section of 1.75 pounds, and playing those sort of mid-double, low 20 carp on that rod is an absolute joy. Then attached to that I've got a little Daiwa reel, and then line choice depends a little bit on your venue choice and maybe the size of the carp that you're trying to catch. So I'd say anything from an 8-pound line, maybe all the way up to a 15 if you're fishing for really big carp. I've got 10-pound line on here today, which is more than enough. It's not overly snaggy, this pit, and the carp aren't massive. And while the rig itself couldn't be simpler, I've got a tiny little Drennan float on here. It's held in place with 2 Drennan float stops, and I do like to use a float adapter. It means I can just change the float. Sometimes changing the float to a different colour top, depending on what sort of light you've got, can help you see the float. And then down on there, it's straight through on that 10-pound line to a size 8-quarter mixer hook. And then you've got 2 choices above there. You want to keep your bulk weight just above the hook, maybe 2 or 3 inches above the hook. You can just pinch a big split shot on there. You want to make sure you've overshotted the float, so if you're not deep enough, the float will actually get pulled under, and use that bulk shot as if it's the plummet to get your depth exactly right. Personally, I like to put a little float stop down there, mould some tungsten putty around there rather than pinching a split shot on, because I think there's always a chance that nipping a shot on the line might weaken the line. So that's the safest and the neatest way to do it. And of talking about that, I'm actually looking at the camera, and behind me I can see them reeds starting to knock, so I'm itching to drop that float in place and see if we can start the morning off with a nice carp. So close. I was being really patient. The float just kept dithering and lifting. I waited until a nice positive bite, and a dreaded hook pull. So frustrating, but so exciting at the same time. Hopefully they'll come back to that spot, but that was a close shave. Well, it seemed as if it was one of those sessions. I was definitely finding chances and finding the carp in the edge, but it seemed like it was nothing more than bad luck to suffer 3 or 4 hook pulls in a row. Normally on that nice soft £1.75 rod, hook pulls aren't an issue, but I think we all have days where things just seem to be up against us. But I got on my toes, I had a walk round, and I found one bigger carp on his own in a bay that was definitely having a bit of a munch on some pellet and corn that I put in. So I lowered the floating position and thought I'd give it about 20 minutes. Well, I felt there was a chance in this little bay. I definitely saw a carp in here, and it did stop and have a little bit of a feed on those pellets, and the float dithered a little bit, but I haven't seen it for about 20 minutes. I'm sure it's left the bay now. That wind is now starting to build. It's the start of this storm that's coming in this afternoon. So I'm going to head back to that original spot where we've seen most of the carp today, because I did put a little bit more pellet in there before I came over here, and hopefully, last chance saloon, maybe I can get one more bite in that spot before I have to head home. Well, the reeds are definitely knocking, and I've seen a few bubbles, so this is last chance saloon. I really hope I can just get one more before I drive home, so fingers crossed, let's try my luck. There's a bubble on the float straight away. Maybe they like the stormy weather. Well, the weather was on the turn and the rain started to fall, and I felt I was fast running out of time, but there was definitely a fish feeding on the spot again. I was getting indications on the float, and I felt there was one last chance of a bite. I'd love to know what's going on down there. You see, look, as if you're then about to strike and that popped back up. Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa. He's found the lily pads. It's that horrible grating noise when you're running through dead lily pads. Come on. Come on, come on, come on. The rain is here and the fish is stuck in the pads. I think it's still on. That helps. We're out for now. Right, I need a net. Here comes the storm. I sort of done an underwater netting job. My glasses have fell off in the water, but probably the most emotional specimen series yet for close shaves, but we got one in the nick of time. Steady on. Right as well. Well, I've never been so pleased to catch a mirror carp, and he might not win any awards for good looks, but I'll take it. It's been a tough day today. This style of fishing can be so exciting but so frustrating at the same time. Very similar to surface fishing. You're watching it all unfold at close quarters, and when you get that bite and you strike and the water erupts, it is super exciting. So I hope it's inspired you to try some float fishing for carp. If you've got a water where they feed in the edge, give it a go, because it really is good fun. But we're going to slip this fella back. The weather front is now coming. It's raining, it's getting windy. I think I've had my little window of opportunity. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch up with you on the next specimen series.